The air hung heavy over Willow Springs plantation as July's merciless heat pressed down upon the sprawling estate. Eleanor Blackwood stood at her bedroom window, watching workers move through the cotton fields that stretched toward the horizon. Her white cotton dress clung to her skin, damp with perspiration despite the early hour. At 21, she had inherited the plantation following her father's unexpected passing 3 months prior, becoming one of the wealthiest unmarried women in Savannah County. "Miss Eleanor," came a soft voice from the doorway. "Your breakfast is served downstairs." Eleanor turned to see Martha, a house slave who had served the Blackwood family since before Eleanor's birth. Martha's dark eyes were cast downward, her hands folded neatly at her waist as she waited for a response. "Thank you, Martha. I'll be down shortly," Eleanor replied, turning back to the window. Her father's passing had left her with responsibilities she'd never anticipated, managing the estate, the finances, and the 63 enslaved people who worked the land and maintained the house. The breakfast room was quiet, except for the gentle clinking of silverware against china. Eleanor ate alone, as she had most mornings since her father's death. The Blackwood legacy weighed upon her shoulders. 5 generations of Blackwoods had built this plantation, expanding their wealth and influence throughout Georgia. Now it all belonged to her. "The ledgers for the month are prepared for your review, Miss Blackwood," said Mr. Hargrove, the estate manager, entering the room with a leather-bound book tucked under his arm. "And there's the matter of the new overseer to discuss." Eleanor nodded, gesturing for him to sit. Her father's overseer had left shortly after his death, unable to accept taking orders from a woman. Finding a replacement had proven challenging. "I've identified 3 candidates," Hargrove continued, placing a sheet of paper before her. "All come with excellent references." Eleanor scanned the names, recognizing one. "Jonathan Wells, from the Reynolds plantation." "Yes, ma'am, he's seeking new employment after a disagreement with Mr. Reynolds." "I know of his methods," Eleanor said, her voice cooling. "He's reputed to be unnecessarily cruel." Hargrove cleared his throat. "His efficiency is unmatched, Miss Blackwood. The Reynolds plantation has the highest yield in the county." "At what cost, Mr. Hargrove?" Eleanor asked, looking up from the paper. "My father may have prioritized profit above all else, but I will not have a man who enjoys inflicting pain overseeing this plantation." The steward's expression tightened. "With all due respect, Miss Blackwood, maintaining discipline is essential for productivity. Your father understood this." "My father is dead, Mr. Hargrove," Eleanor replied sharply. "And while I live, Willow Springs will operate according to my principles." After Hargrove departed, Eleanor ventured to the estate office, her father's sanctuary now hers. The room smelled of tobacco and leather, unchanged since the day he collapsed behind the mahogany desk that now belonged to her. She sat in his chair, running her fingers along the polished wood. Behind the desk hung a portrait of Augustus Blackwood, her great-grandfather, who had established Willow Springs in 1772. His stern countenance seemed to judge her, questioning whether she possessed the resolve to preserve what generations of Blackwood men had built. Eleanor opened the ledger, examining the columns of figures that quantified the plantation's operations. Cotton prices, equipment costs, food provisions, and the appraised value of each enslaved person listed like livestock. Her stomach tightened as she read the names, many of whom she had known since childhood, reduced to dollar figures on a page. That afternoon, Eleanor walked to the old oak that stood at the edge of the main house's garden. Beneath its sprawling branches sat Isaac, an elderly enslaved man who had once been her father's valet but was now too frail for regular duties. His gnarled fingers worked methodically, weaving a basket from dried reeds. At 83, Isaac was the oldest person at Willow Springs, born into slavery on this very land. "Good afternoon, Isaac," Eleanor greeted him, settling onto a stone bench nearby. "Miss Eleanor," he acknowledged with a nod, his hands never ceasing their work. "May I sit with you a while?" she asked, though she had already done so. "It's your land, miss," he replied, his voice like weathered leather. "Everything here belongs to you now." A heavy silence stretched between them. Eleanor had sought Isaac's company since childhood, drawn to his quiet wisdom and the stories he would share when her father wasn't present. He had taught her to identify birds by their songs and which wild berries were safe to eat. "I received a letter from Mr. Caldwell this morning," Eleanor said after a while. "He's increased his offer for the plantation quite substantially." Isaac's hands paused momentarily before resuming their rhythm. "Will you sell then?" "I'm considering it," Eleanor admitted. "I could move to Boston, where my mother's sister lives. Start anew where nobody knows the Blackwood name." "And what would become of us?" Isaac asked, his eyes still fixed on his work. The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor had no answer that satisfied her conscience. "I'm trapped, Isaac," she finally whispered. "If I sell, most of you would likely be separated, sold to different buyers. If I stay, I perpetuate a system I've grown to despise." "Freedom and bondage take many forms, Miss Eleanor," Isaac said softly. "Even those who own others can find themselves chained in ways they don't recognize." And as evening approached, Eleanor returned to the main house, where she found Martha preparing the dining room for supper. "Martha," Eleanor said, "has Isaac eaten yet?" "No, miss. He usually takes his meal in the quarters after dark." "Please bring him to the kitchen. I'd like him to dine there tonight." Martha's eyes widened slightly. "In the kitchen, miss?" "Yes, and I'd like you to join him." "Miss Eleanor, that's not—" "Please, Martha, just do as I ask." After Martha departed, Eleanor went to her father's study and unlocked the drawer where he had kept important documents. Among them was a small leather case containing the keys to the estate, including those to the heavy iron box in which her father had stored cash and valuables. Eleanor opened the box and counted out $300, a considerable sum. She wrapped the money in a handkerchief and tucked it into her pocket. Her heart pounded as she contemplated what she was about to do, but recent dreams had left her sleepless and haunted. 3 nights ago she had dreamt of her father. In the dream, he stood in a vast cotton field, but instead of plants, human hands reached up from the soil, grasping at his ankles as he struggled to walk. He had called her name, begging for help, but when she tried to reach him, the ground beneath her feet had turned to quicksand, pulling her down. Later that night, after the house had fallen quiet, Eleanor slipped out to the small cabin where Isaac lived alone. A single candle flickered in the window. She knocked softly. Isaac opened the door, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Miss Eleanor? Is something wrong? May I come in?" she asked, glancing nervously behind her. The cabin was simple but meticulously kept. A pallet bed occupied one corner, a small table and chair another. A few possessions, a wooden comb, a fraying Bible, and a smooth stone sat on a shelf above the bed. "I need to ask you something, Isaac," Eleanor said, standing awkwardly in the center of the small space. "If you were free, where would you go?" Isaac studied her face carefully before answering. "My son was sold to a plantation in Pennsylvania 15 years ago. Last I heard, he'd managed to escape north. If I were free, I'd try to find him." Eleanor nodded, then reached into her pocket and withdrew the handkerchief-wrapped money. "Tomorrow night a man named Samuel Cooper will come with a wagon. He's a friend of my late mother's family. He'll take you as far as Philadelphia." Isaac stared at the money she held out, not moving to take it. "Miss Eleanor, what you're suggesting is illegal, I know." She placed the money on the table. "But I can no longer live with myself otherwise." "Your father, my father is dead," Eleanor interrupted, echoing her words to Hargrove earlier that day. "And I refuse to have his sins on my conscience any longer." Isaac finally reached for the money, his hand trembling slightly. "The others, one at a time," Eleanor whispered. "I must be careful. But I promise you, Isaac, I will find a way, starting with you." As Eleanor turned to leave, Isaac caught her wrist. His touch was gentle but insistent. "Miss Eleanor, you understand what this means. If they discover what you've done, then I'll face the consequences," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. but I won't continue to profit from others' suffering. Not anymore. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She paced her bedroom, questioning her decision. Was she being recklessly idealistic? The penalties for helping enslaved people escape were severe. Imprisonment, hefty fines, potential violence from neighbors if they discovered her betrayal of Southern principles. Yet when she finally dozed near dawn, she slept more peacefully than she had since her father's death. In the morning light, a strange sense of calm had settled over her, despite the risk she was taking. Eleanor spent the day as usual, reviewing accounts and meeting with Hargrove about plantation matters. She instructed him that Isaac should be left to his basket weaving, citing his age and frailty. "The old man produces little of value," Hargrove commented dismissively. "It would be more economical to reduce his provisions." Eleanor felt a surge of anger. "Mr. Hargrove, Isaac has served this family for over 8 decades. He will receive full rations for the remainder of his life, however long that may be. Is that understood?" As evening approached, anxiety crept back into Eleanor's chest. Had she been too bold, too naive? Would Cooper arrive as promised, or would something go wrong? After dinner, Eleanor retired to her room early, claiming a headache. From her window, she watched the plantation grow quiet as darkness fell. The slave quarters became still except for a few flickering lights from oil lamps. Somewhere, a dog barked, then fell silent. Just before midnight, Eleanor spotted the faint glow of lantern light moving slowly along the perimeter of the property near the North Road, where Cooper had agreed to meet Isaac. Her breath caught as she strained to see in the darkness. 2 figures moved toward the light, Isaac and Martha. Eleanor hadn't told Martha of the plan, but somehow she had known. Eleanor watched as the figures converged near the road, exchanged brief words. Then Isaac climbed into what must have been Cooper's wagon. The light moved away, disappearing into the night. It was done. Isaac was gone, hopefully to freedom, to family. As Eleanor turned from the window, a chill swept through the room despite the summer heat. For a moment, she thought she saw her father's reflection in the mirror on her dressing table, his face contorted with rage. She blinked and the image vanished, but a sense of foreboding remained, settling over her like a shroud. Eleanor Blackwood had taken her first step against generations of family tradition, against the very foundation of Southern society. There would be consequences, perhaps not tonight, perhaps not tomorrow, but they would come. Of that, she was certain. And somewhere deep in her heart, Eleanor wondered if she had just cursed the Blackwood name forever. The following morning broke with an unusual chill for July in Georgia. Eleanor woke before dawn, her sleep having been fitful and plagued by dreams of pursuit, of running through endless cotton fields with unseen hunters at her heels. Rising from her bed, she crossed to the window and gazed out at the plantation, half expecting to see chaos erupting with the discovery of Isaac's absence. Instead, Willow Springs appeared peaceful in the grey pre-dawn light. Workers were already moving toward the fields, their silhouettes dark against the lightening sky. Nothing seemed amiss. Not yet. Eleanor dressed quickly, choosing a simple blue dress rather than calling for Martha's assistance. She suspected Martha had helped Isaac escape, and while Eleanor was grateful, she worried for the woman's safety. The fewer interactions they had today, the better for Martha. Descending to the dining room, Eleanor found Mr. Hargrove already waiting, his face grim. "Mr. Hargrove," Eleanor acknowledged, taking her seat at the head of the table. "You're here early. There's a matter requiring your immediate attention, Miss Blackwood." His voice was tight, with barely contained anger. "Isaac is missing." Eleanor's heart lurched, but she kept her expression neutral. "Missing? Perhaps he's simply wandered the grounds. At his age, confusion is not uncommon. His cabin is empty, his few possessions are gone." Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "This was no confused wandering, Miss Blackwood. The old man has run." Eleanor took a sip of the coffee Martha had just poured, using the moment to steady herself. "That seems unlikely, Mr. Hargrove. Isaac is elderly and frail. Where would he go?" "That is precisely what I intend to discover." Hargrove placed his palms flat on the table. "I've already sent for Mr. Bennet and his tracking dogs. They should arrive within the hour." Eleanor felt cold dread wash over her. Bennet was known throughout the county for his brutal efficiency in hunting fugitives. His dogs were trained to attack, often maiming those they caught. "That won't be necessary," Eleanor said firmly. "If Isaac has indeed left, he poses no threat. At his age, he won't get far." "With all due respect, Miss Blackwood," Hargrove's voice hardened, "this isn't about one old man. It's about maintaining order. If the others believe they can simply walk away without consequence, we'll have chaos." Eleanor met his gaze. "Nevertheless, I will not have dogs hunting down an elderly man who has served this family loyally for decades. If he's gone, then he's gone." Hargrove's face reddened. "Miss Blackwood, I must insist. Your father would never—" "My father is dead, Mr. Hargrove." Eleanor interrupted, her voice sharp. "And I am mistress of Willow Springs now. My decision is final." After a tense silence, Hargrove stood. "Very well, but when word spreads, and it will, don't say I didn't warn you." Once alone, Eleanor exhaled shakily. The confrontation had gone better than she'd feared, but she knew it was only the beginning. Hargrove wouldn't let the matter rest so easily. Later that morning, Eleanor found Martha in the kitchen, preparing vegetables for the midday meal. The older woman's hands moved methodically, but Eleanor noticed a slight tremor. "Martha," Eleanor said quietly, ensuring they were alone, "I need to speak with you." Martha didn't look up from her work. "Yes, Miss Eleanor?" "About Isaac." "I don't know nothing about where that old man went," Martha interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that's what I told Mr. Hargrove when he asked." Eleanor moved closer. "Martha, I know you helped him, and I want you to know that Miss Eleanor," Martha's voice was urgent as she finally looked up, "don't say another word. Walls have ears in this house, always have." The warning silenced Eleanor. Martha was right. Servants moved quietly through the house at all hours. Anything overheard could become dangerous information. "I only wanted to say," Eleanor continued carefully, "that I've instructed Mr. Hargrove not to pursue the matter further. Isaac's age entitles him to rest, wherever he chooses to take it." Martha's eyes widened slightly at Eleanor's coded message. A moment of understanding passed between them before Martha nodded and returned to her work. That afternoon, Eleanor retreated to her father's study, her study now, and locked the door. From a hidden compartment in the desk that her father had shown her years ago, she withdrew a small journal. Here, she began recording her thoughts, her plans, her fears. "Today marks the beginning," she wrote. "One soul freed from bondage with God's grace, but at what cost to those who remain? And to my own safety, I must proceed with caution, yet I cannot continue as before, not with the knowledge I now possess. Father, if you watch from beyond, I hope you understand that I do this not to disgrace our name, but to redeem it." A knock at the study door startled her. Eleanor quickly returned the journal to its hiding place before opening the door. Martha stood there, her face ashen. "Riders coming up the drive, Miss Eleanor. Mr. Hargrove is with them." Eleanor hurried to the front porch. 5 men on horseback approached, Hargrove among them. She recognized Sheriff Daniels and 2 neighboring plantation owners, Caldwell and Harrison. The 5th man, tall and severe in a black coat despite the heat, was unfamiliar. "Miss Blackwood," Hargrove called as they dismounted, "these gentlemen wish to speak with you regarding the matter we discussed this morning." Eleanor straightened her spine, lifting her chin slightly. "Gentlemen, to what do I owe this visit?" Sheriff Daniels removed his hat. "Miss Blackwood, I apologize for the intrusion, but there's been a report of a runaway from your property." As I informed Mr. Hargrove," Eleanor replied evenly, "I've chosen not to pursue the matter. Isaac was elderly and of little use to the plantation anymore." Caldwell, a corpulent man whose plantation bordered Willow Springs to the east, stepped forward. "With respect, Miss Blackwood, that decision isn't entirely yours to make. Runaways threaten all our properties. They set a dangerous example." "Indeed," added Harrison, a thin, hawk-faced man. "We have a mutual agreement in this county to assist one another in such matters. Your father was a signatory to this pact." "And who might this be?" Eleanor asked, looking toward the stranger. "Augustus Reed," the man introduced himself with a slight bow. "I specialize in the recovery of valuable property." "A slave catcher." Eleanor's stomach turned. "My property, Mr. Reed, is my concern alone. There's also the matter of how he managed to leave," Sheriff Daniels interjected. "An old man like Isaac couldn't have gotten far without help." Eleanor felt a chill at the implication. "What exactly are you suggesting, Sheriff?" "Only that we'd like permission to question your house staff," he replied. "Particularly that Martha woman. She and Isaac were close, as I recall." "Absolutely not." Eleanor's voice was steel. "My staff is loyal and hard-working. I won't have them subjected to interrogation based on mere suspicion." "Miss Blackwood," Reed spoke, his voice deceptively soft, "runaways don't simply vanish. Someone helped your slave escape. That person has committed a crime." "If you wish to investigate a crime on my property, Sheriff Daniels," Eleanor said, turning to face him directly, "you will require a warrant. Until then, I must ask you all to leave." A heavy silence fell over the group. Eleanor could feel their judgment, their suspicion. Women weren't supposed to challenge men's authority, especially not on matters of property and law. "Very well," the sheriff finally said, replacing his hat. "But this matter isn't concluded, Miss Blackwood. Your father was respected in this county because he understood his responsibilities to the community. I hope you'll come to understand yours." As the men remounted, Caldwell lingered. "My offer to purchase Willow Springs stands, Miss Blackwood. In fact, given these complications, I'm willing to increase it by 5%. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, but Willow Springs is not for sale," Eleanor replied coldly. After they departed, Eleanor remained on the porch, watching dust settle on the drive. Hargrove had chosen not to return to the house, riding away with the others, a clear statement of where his loyalties now lay. Martha appeared at Eleanor's side. "This is just the beginning, Miss Eleanor." "I know," Eleanor replied softly. "They'll be watching the property now, watching you." Eleanor turned to look at the older woman. "Are you afraid, Martha?" A complicated expression crossed Martha's face. Fear, yes, but also something harder, more resolute. "I've been afraid every day of my life, Miss Eleanor. This ain't no different." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, watching the moonlight cast silver shadows across the grounds. In the distance, she could see a lantern moving along the perimeter of the property, one of Hargrove's men, no doubt, patrolling for any further escape attempts. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the slave quarters, where dim lights glowed in some windows. Were they discussing Isaac's disappearance? Did they suspect her involvement? More importantly, did they feel hope or fear at the news? A soft knock at her bedroom door startled her. Opening it cautiously, she found Martha, a shawl wrapped around her nightdress. "Martha, what is it? May I come in, miss?" Martha's voice was barely audible. Once inside with the door closed, Martha spoke urgently. "There's talk in the quarters. Some say Isaac was taken by the devil himself because he stole from the master years ago." "What?" Eleanor was confused. "Isaac never stole anything." "I know that, and you know that," Martha replied. "But it's better they believe that than suspect the truth. Hargrove's been asking questions, watching everyone. He's convinced someone helped Isaac leave." Eleanor sat heavily on the edge of her bed. "He's right, of course." "Yes, but he can't prove it," Martha said firmly, "and we need to keep it that way, Miss Eleanor. Because if they ever discover what you've done—" The unspoken threat hung in the air between them. Aiding a slave's escape was a serious crime in Georgia. Eleanor could lose the plantation, face imprisonment, or worse. "There's something else," Martha continued after a moment. "Before your father died, he told Isaac something Isaac shared with me just before he left." Eleanor looked up, curious. "What was it?" Martha hesitated. "Your father kept a journal, not the business ledgers, but a personal account. Isaac said your father wrote in it every night for years. Said it contained everything, including things that could destroy the Blackwood name. A journal? Eleanor had never seen her father keeping such a record. Where? That's just it. Isaac didn't know. Your father told him about it when he was ill, delirious with fever, said he needed to destroy it before anyone found it. But he didn't destroy it, Eleanor realized. He died too suddenly. Martha nodded. And now it's somewhere in this house. If the wrong person finds it, we need to find it first, Eleanor said decisively. Do you have any idea where he might have hidden it? No, miss, but Isaac thought it might be in the study. Your father spent most of his time there. Eleanor had already searched the study thoroughly when settling her father's affairs and had found nothing beyond business documents and correspondence. If there was a journal, it was well concealed. I'll search again, she promised. Thank you for telling me, Martha. After Martha left, Eleanor lay awake, her thoughts racing. What secrets had her father recorded? And why mention the journal to Isaac, of all people? The next morning brought news that sent a chill through Eleanor's heart. Sheriff Daniels had returned, requesting her presence in the front parlor. When she entered, she found him standing with Augustus Reed, the slave catcher. Miss Blackwood, the sheriff greeted her with cold formality. Mr. Reed has something to report that may interest you. Reed stepped forward, his thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. A wagon was seen near the northern boundary of your property 2 nights ago, Miss Blackwood. The description matches that of a known abolitionist sympathizer, one Samuel Cooper. Eleanor kept her expression neutral despite her racing heart. I fail to see how this concerns me, Mr. Reed. Cooper has been linked to the Underground Railroad, Reed continued, watching her face closely. He specializes in helping slaves escape to the north. And you believe he took Isaac? Eleanor asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. We know he did, Sheriff Daniels interjected. A witness saw an elderly Negro man matching Isaac's description climbing into Cooper's wagon. Eleanor's mind raced. A witness? Who could have seen them in the darkness? If that's true, then Isaac is long gone by now, beyond our reach. Perhaps, Reed said, that not quite smile still playing on his lips. But Cooper wouldn't have known about Isaac without local help. Someone told him about the old man, arranged the meeting. Are you accusing someone on my staff, Mr. Reed? Eleanor's voice sharpened. I'm merely following the evidence, Miss Blackwood, and it seems to lead directly to your household. Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat. We'd like permission to question your house slaves, starting with Martha. She and Isaac were particularly close. I've already refused this request once, Sheriff, Eleanor replied firmly. My answer remains the same. Then perhaps you'd prefer to answer some questions yourself, Miss Blackwood, Reed suggested, his voice dangerously soft. Before Eleanor could respond, the parlor door opened and Martha entered carrying a tea tray. Her eyes widened slightly at seeing the 2 men, but she quickly composed herself. I brought refreshments, Miss Eleanor, she said, setting the tray on a side table. Shall I pour? That won't be necessary, Martha, Eleanor replied, not missing the look Reed exchanged with the sheriff. Our guests were just leaving. Actually, Reed said, I'd like to ask Martha a few questions first. Martha froze, her hands still on the tea tray. Eleanor stepped between her and Reed. Mr. Reed, Sheriff Daniels, I have been patient, but my hospitality has limits. You have no warrant, no evidence of wrongdoing, and therefore no right to interrogate anyone on my property. Now, I must insist that you leave. The sheriff studied her for a long moment before nodding curtly. Very well, Miss Blackwood, but this matter is far from settled. After they departed, Eleanor turned to Martha, who had visibly paled. They know, Martha whispered. They know about Cooper. But they can't prove anything, Eleanor insisted, trying to project more confidence than she felt. We need to be careful, Martha, very careful. That afternoon, Eleanor returned to her father's study and began a methodical search for the hidden journal. She examined every book, checked behind every painting, tapped along the wainscoting for hollow spaces. Hours passed with no success. As dusk approached, Eleanor sat at the desk, frustrated and increasingly anxious. If her father's journal contained damaging information, perhaps even evidence of previous slaves helped to freedom, it could be devastating if found by the wrong people. Her gaze fell on the portrait of Augustus Blackwood that hung behind the desk. Her great-grandfather stared back at her with cold eyes, his hand resting on a leather-bound book, a Bible, she had always assumed. But looking at it now, she wondered. Standing on a chair, Eleanor carefully lifted the heavy portrait from its hooks. Behind it, the wall appeared solid. She ran her fingers along the edges, feeling for any irregularity. Nothing. Then, almost by accident, her hand brushed against the back of the frame itself. A section moved slightly. Heart-pounding, Eleanor examined the frame more closely and discovered a small compartment built into its wooden backing. Inside was a slim leather volume, its pages yellow with age. Hands trembling, Eleanor opened it. Inside, in her father's distinctive handwriting, was a detailed account spanning decades. She flipped through the pages, scanning entries that documented the daily operations of Willow Springs, including punishments administered, escape attempts thwarted, and slaves sold. But as she read further, Eleanor discovered something unexpected. In later entries, her father's tone had changed. He wrote of doubts, of sleepless nights plagued by guilt. The final entries, written during his last illness, were almost confessional in nature. "I have built my fortune on the backs of those I've treated as less than human," one passage read. "Now, facing my Maker, I fear judgment for these sins. Eleanor will inherit everything, but also the moral stain that comes with it. May God forgive me for what I've done, and for the burden I place on my daughter." Eleanor closed the journal, tears blurring her vision. Her father had known, had understood the moral corruption at the heart of their wealth, yet he had never found the courage to act on that knowledge. "I will not make the same mistake," Eleanor whispered to the empty room. "I will find a way to right this wrong, no matter the cost." As night fell over Willow Springs, Eleanor made her decision. She would continue what she had started with Isaac, finding ways to help others escape to freedom, one by one, if necessary. The risk was enormous, the danger real, but after reading her father's words, she could not turn back. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and distant thunder rumbled like a warning across the Georgia sky. The air felt charged, as if the very elements sensed the upheaval to come. Eleanor Blackwood stood at her bedroom window, watching lightning illuminate the cotton fields that had built her family's fortune. Behind her, carefully hidden in a new hiding place, her father's journal lay alongside her own. Two testimonies to the moral reckoning of the Blackwood legacy. A legacy that Eleanor was now determined to dismantle, no matter what darkness it might unleash. By mid-August, the atmosphere at Willow Springs had grown unbearably tense. 2 more enslaved people had disappeared in the weeks following Isaac's escape: Jeremiah, a skilled blacksmith, and his wife Rebecca. Their absence was discovered at dawn by Hargrove, who immediately stormed to the main house, pounding on Eleanor's door before propriety would normally allow. 3 in less than a month, Miss Blackwood," he seethed, pacing the morning room where Eleanor had received him. "This is no coincidence. This is organized, planned." Eleanor sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap, though her heart raced. "Mr. Hargrove, we have no evidence of organization. Perhaps they simply saw an opportunity and took it." "A coincidence, I might believe, Miss Blackwood. But 3? Hargrove stopped his pacing to stare at her. "Someone is helping them, someone with access to the property, knowledge of the patrol schedules." "What exactly are you implying, Mr. Hargrove?" Eleanor asked, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm not implying anything, miss. I'm stating facts. And another fact is that neighboring plantations have had no such problems. Only Willow Springs, only since your father's passing." Eleanor rose from her chair. "I understand your concern for the plantation's assets, Mr. Hargrove, but I must remind you that you speak to the owner of Willow Springs. Your tone borders on insolence." Hargrove's face reddened. "Forgive me, Miss Blackwood, But my duty is to protect this plantation's interests, as was your father's wish when he hired me. And my wish, Eleanor countered, is that you focus on the harvest, which is only weeks away. We can discuss additional security measures for the quarters, but I won't have resources diverted from our primary concern. After Hargrove departed, Eleanor remained in the morning room, her composed facade crumbling once alone. She sank back into her chair, hands trembling. Martha entered quietly, closing the door behind her. "I heard Mr. Hargrove," she said softly. "He suspects, doesn't he?" Eleanor nodded. "He has no proof, but yes, he suspects something." "It's too dangerous now, Miss Eleanor," Martha whispered urgently. "They're watching everything, everyone. Sheriff Daniels has men patrolling the county roads at night. That slave catcher Reed is still in town asking questions." "I know," Eleanor acknowledged, "but I can't stop now, Martha, not when there's still so much to be done." Martha moved closer, her voice barely audible. "Miss Eleanor, they're saying things in town about you, questioning your soundness of mind, saying grief has unbalanced you." Eleanor gave a bitter laugh. "Of course they are. A woman making her own decisions, challenging their precious system. What else could explain it but madness? Mr. Caldwell has been calling on neighbors, speaking against you," Martha continued. "And Reverend Thomas preached about the duties of Christian ownership last Sunday, looking directly at your empty pew the entire time. The community's turning against her was expected, but still painful to hear. Eleanor had been raised among these people, had broken bread in their homes, danced at their balls. Now she was becoming a pariah." "Let them talk," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. "Words can't harm us." "Words lead to actions, Miss Eleanor," Martha warned. "And there are men in this county who would do whatever they thought necessary to protect their way of life." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Martha's warning echoed in her mind, along with the knowledge that another escape was planned for the following night. Samuel Cooper would return for Daniel and his son Thomas, a skilled carpenter, and his apprentice, whose absence would be immediately noticed. Around midnight, a noise from downstairs startled her. Eleanor slipped from her bed, pulling on a dressing gown. Cautiously, she opened her bedroom door and listened. Muffled voices came from the direction of her father's study. Eleanor moved silently down the hallway and stairs, keeping to the shadows. The study door was ajar, light from a lantern spilling into the corridor. Peering through the gap, she saw Hargrove rifling through her father's desk, pulling out drawers and examining papers. "Found anything?" a second voice asked. "Sheriff Daniels," Eleanor realized with a jolt. "Not yet," Hargrove replied, continuing his search. "But if there's evidence, it'll be here. Harrison said he saw her writing in a journal the other day when he called to discuss cotton prices. She hid it when he entered." "We need proof, Hargrove," the sheriff said impatiently. "The word of a grieving, possibly deranged young woman won't stand against yours in court. But we still need something tangible if we're to petition for control of the estate." Eleanor's blood ran cold. They were planning to have her declared incompetent, to take Willow Springs from her. "What about the girl who works in the kitchen, Bessie?" the sheriff continued. "Could she be persuaded to testify?" "Possibly," Hargrove mused. "She's young, easily frightened, and she's close with Martha, who I'm certain is involved." Eleanor had heard enough. She retreated silently upstairs, her mind racing. They had no proof yet, but they were actively searching for it and planning to coerce testimony from her staff. Time was running out faster than she'd realized. Returning to her room, Eleanor retrieved both journals, her father's and her own, from their hiding place behind a loose brick in the fireplace. She needed to move them somewhere safer, somewhere no one would think to look. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Miss Eleanor," Martha's voice was barely audible. "Are you awake?" Eleanor quickly tucked the journals under her pillow before opening the door. Martha slipped inside, her expression grave. "Hargrove and the sheriff are in the house," she whispered. "I know. They're searching the study for evidence against me." Martha's eyes widened. "Then you know we need to change our plans. Daniel and Thomas can't leave tomorrow night. It's too dangerous." "If they don't leave tomorrow, when can they?" Eleanor countered. "Security will only increase. This may be their only chance." "Miss Eleanor, please," Martha implored. "They'll be watching the North Road where Cooper usually comes. If they catch him, then we'll use a different route," Eleanor decided. "The creek path to the east, through the Widowmaker Marsh. No one patrols there because it's too dangerous to navigate at night." "For good reason," Martha objected. "People have drowned in those marshes, lost in the dark." "Cooper knows the way," Eleanor insisted. "He mentioned it as an alternative. We just need to get word to him to use that approach instead." Martha looked skeptical but nodded. "I'll try to get a message to him through Bessie's cousin at the Miller farm. He sometimes carries notes for us." After Martha left, Eleanor removed the journals from beneath her pillow. The house was no longer safe for storing such incriminating evidence. After a moment's thought, she wrapped them in oilcloth and placed them in a small wooden box. She would need to find a hiding place elsewhere on the property, somewhere Hargrove would never think to look. The next day passed in a haze of tension. Eleanor went about her normal routine, reviewing accounts with the new overseer Hargrove had hired after their disagreement, a grim-faced man named Tucker who watched her with undisguised suspicion. She visited the smokehouse to check on preparations for winter, toured the cotton fields to assess the coming harvest, and took tea on the veranda as she did most afternoons. All the while, she felt eyes on her. Servants moved through the house more quietly than usual, exchanging glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Hargrove appeared and disappeared at odd hours, always watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. As evening approached, Eleanor took the wrapped journals and left the house under the pretense of visiting her mother's grave in the small family cemetery at the edge of the gardens. Once there, she knelt as if in prayer, using the position to conceal her actions as she dug a small hole behind the headstone and buried the box. The sun was setting as she walked back toward the house. The air felt unnaturally still, heavy with impending rain and something else, a sense of foreboding that Eleanor couldn't shake. In her bedroom, she found a small folded note on her pillow. Opening it, she recognized Martha's careful script. Cooper warned, "Will come by marsh path at midnight. D&T prepared." Eleanor burned the note in a candle flame, watching it curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. Everything was arranged. Now they could only wait and hope. Night fell, bringing with it a storm that had been threatening all day. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder shook the house to its foundations. Eleanor was grateful for the weather. The noise would cover any sounds of escape, and the rain would make tracking more difficult if they were discovered. At 11 o'clock, Eleanor dressed in a dark gown and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Most of the household was asleep, though she knew Tucker had men patrolling the quarters despite the storm. She needed to create a diversion. Moving quietly to the kitchen, Eleanor took a lantern and made her way to the stables. The horses were restless, disturbed by the thunder. Eleanor approached her own mare, Athena, and several other horses, carefully removing the pins that secured their stall doors. Then, lighting a small bundle of straw, she tossed it into an empty stall filled with hay. The fire caught quickly, and Eleanor backed away, raising her voice in alarm. "Fire! Fire in the stables!" The reaction was immediate. Stable hands emerged from their quarters, shouting in panic. Tucker and his men came running from the slave quarters, and within minutes Hargrove himself appeared, directing the bucket brigade as rain continued to pour from the heavens. In the chaos, no one noticed Eleanor slipping away toward the eastern edge of the property. No one saw her meet briefly with Daniel and Thomas near the tool shed, pressing a packet containing money and directions into Daniel's hands. And no one followed as the two men disappeared into the darkness toward Widowmaker Marsh, where Cooper would be waiting. Eleanor returned to help with the stable fire, which had been contained before causing serious damage. Soaked to the skin and smudged with soot, she looked appropriately distressed when Hargrove questioned her. "I couldn't sleep because of the storm," she explained. "I went to check on Athena. She's always nervous during thunderstorms. That's when I smelled the smoke." Hargrove looked suspicious, but couldn't question her story in front of the gathered workers. "Fortunate you noticed it so quickly, Miss Blackwood, though strange that a fire would start in this downpour." "Providence, Mr. Hargrove," Eleanor replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "The Lord works in mysterious ways." By the time order was restored, it was well past midnight. Daniel and Thomas would be miles away by now, on their way north with Cooper. Eleanor retired to her room, exhausted but relieved. 3 more souls freed from bondage, but her relief was short-lived. Shortly after dawn, she was awakened by shouting. Looking out her window, she saw Tucker and several men returning to the main house, carrying something between them. With a sickening lurch in her stomach, Eleanor rushed to dress and hurried downstairs. In the front hall, Tucker and his men had laid a body on the floor. Thomas, the carpenter's son, his clothes soaked and muddy, his young face slack in death. "Found him in Widowmaker Marsh," Tucker reported grimly as Eleanor appeared. "Drowned, looks like. No sign of his father." Eleanor stared in horror at the boy's body. Thomas was only 17, skilled with his hands, quick to smile. Now he lay still, his promise extinguished. "Miss Blackwood," Hargrove's voice came from behind her, cold and precise. "Perhaps now you'd care to explain how Thomas and his father came to be in the marsh in the middle of a storm, when they should have been secured in the quarters." Eleanor couldn't tear her eyes from Thomas's face. I don't know," she managed, her voice barely audible. "Don't you?" Hargrove pressed. "Just as you don't know how Isaac disappeared, or Jeremiah and Rebecca." Sheriff Daniels appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with narrowed eyes. "What's happened here?" "Another coincidence, Sheriff," Hargrove replied, his gaze never leaving Eleanor. "Another slave from Willow Springs found where he shouldn't be. Only this time, the poor devil didn't make it." The sheriff looked from the body to Eleanor, then back to Hargrove. "Miss Blackwood, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about what's been happening on your property." Eleanor felt the walls closing in around her. Thomas was dead, drowned in the marsh she had directed him to use. His blood was on her hands, as surely as if she had held him beneath the water herself. "Yes," she agreed hollowly. "I think it is." They moved to the parlor, where Eleanor sat rigidly while the sheriff paced before her. Hargrove stood by the door, as if to prevent her escape. "Miss Blackwood," the sheriff began, "I've been patient out of respect for your father and your family's position in this county, but I can no longer ignore what's happening here." "And what exactly do you think is happening, Sheriff?" Eleanor asked, forcing strength into her voice. "I think someone at Willow Springs is helping slaves escape. And I think you either know who it is or you're involved yourself." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "That's a serious accusation." "A boy's dead, Miss Blackwood," the sheriff replied sharply, "and 3 valuable slaves are missing. Those are serious matters." "For now," Hargrove interjected. "Just got word Daniel wasn't found with the boy. He's still missing." The sheriff's expression darkened. "Miss Blackwood, I'm placing you under house arrest pending a full investigation. You are not to leave Willow Springs without my permission. Mr. Hargrove will oversee the plantation's operations until this matter is resolved." "You have no authority to do that," Eleanor protested. "Willow Springs belongs to me. I am its legal owner." "Oh, and you may remain so," the sheriff acknowledged, "if you're cleared of wrongdoing. But if evidence proves you've been helping slaves escape, you'll face serious consequences, including forfeiture of property." After they left, Eleanor remained in the parlor, staring blindly at the wall. Thomas was dead because of her, because she had been reckless, overconfident, because she had believed she could outsmart men like Hargrove and the sheriff, men who had everything to lose if she succeeded. Martha found her there hours later, still sitting motionless. "Miss Eleanor," she whispered, closing the door behind her. "I just heard about Thomas. God rest his soul." Eleanor looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "It's my fault, Martha. I sent them through the marsh. You couldn't have known the storm would make the path so treacherous," Martha said gently. "I should have waited. Should have found another way. Eleanor's voice broke. He was so young, Martha. So young. Martha sat beside her, taking Eleanor's cold hands in her warm ones. Miss Eleanor, listen to me. What you're doing, it's right, it's necessary. But it's also dangerous, and not just for you. The sheriff has placed me under house arrest, Eleanor said dully. Hargrove is taking control of the plantation. Martha nodded grimly. I heard. There's talk they mean to have you declared unfit to manage your affairs. Mr. Caldwell is already claiming he has an agreement to purchase Willow Springs once the matter is settled. But they can't do that, Eleanor objected. Not without proof. They'll find proof, Miss Eleanor, Martha said grimly. Or they'll create it. Men like that always do. That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the plantation that had been her family's legacy for generations. In the slave quarters, a single light burned. Someone else unable to find rest after the day's events. Was it all worth it? Isaac was free, hopefully reunited with his son in the north by now. Jeremiah and Rebecca had escaped safely, as had Daniel, despite the loss of his son. 4 souls freed from bondage against 1 life lost. The moral arithmetic made Eleanor's stomach turn. How could she weigh human lives against each other like cotton bales? How could anyone? Yet wasn't that precisely what the entire system of slavery did? Assigning value to human beings, trading them like livestock, separating families for profit. No more, Eleanor whispered to the darkness. No more deaths, no more suffering in the name of Blackwood prosperity. In that moment, Eleanor made her decision. If she remained at Willow Springs, she would eventually be forced out, declared incompetent, arrested for aiding runaways, or worse. Hargrove and men like him would take control, and everything would continue as before. The enslaved people of Willow Springs would remain in bondage, perhaps treated even more harshly as a result of her actions. There was only one solution that would free them all. The following morning, Eleanor asked Martha to gather all the house servants in the kitchen after breakfast. Standing before them, Martha, Bessie, John the footman, and several others, Eleanor spoke quietly but firmly. I know you've heard about Thomas, she began, and about the sheriff's decision to place me under house arrest. Things at Willow Springs are going to change, and I wanted you to hear it from me first. They watched her warily, uncertain where this was leading. I've decided to free you all, Eleanor continued. Every person enslaved at Willow Springs will receive their papers of manumission. I've already sent for my lawyer to begin the process. Stunned silence met her words, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Martha stepped forward, her expression concerned. Miss Eleanor, they won't allow it. The law requires special permission from the state legislature to free this many slaves at once. I know, Eleanor acknowledged. Which is why I'll also be selling Willow Springs, not to Caldwell or any local buyer, but to a northern investor who has agreed to my terms. This announcement caused even greater consternation. Eleanor raised her hand for silence. The sale will be completed quickly, before Hargrove and the sheriff can prevent it. The new owner will convert the plantation to paid labor. Those who wish to stay and work for wages may do so. Those who wish to leave will be free to go with enough money to start anew elsewhere. Miss Eleanor, John spoke up hesitantly, forgive me, but why would any northerner buy a plantation? And why would they agree to such terms? Because the buyer is an abolitionist, Eleanor explained, a friend of Mr. Cooper's, who's been looking for ways to undermine the slave economy from within. He'll operate at a loss if necessary to prove that paid labor can succeed where slavery has been the norm. What Eleanor didn't say was that the purchase would be largely symbolic. Most of her inheritance would finance the manumissions and severance payments, effectively paying for the freedom of everyone at Willow Springs. She would leave Georgia with almost nothing, but with a clear conscience at last. What will happen to you, Miss Eleanor? Bessie asked, her young face troubled. Eleanor managed a smile. I'll go north to Boston. My mother's sister has offered me a home there. Later that day, Eleanor sat at her father's desk, composing a letter to her aunt in Boston. The woman had written after learning of her brother-in-law's death, offering condolences and inviting Eleanor to visit should the management of the plantation ever become too burdensome. Eleanor had never met her aunt, who had scandalized society by marrying a northern abolitionist decades earlier. Her father had forbidden all contact with his sister-in-law, calling her a traitor to her southern heritage. Now, Eleanor hoped the woman's offer still stood, and that it would extend to a niece who had just divested herself of her inheritance in a way that would make her unwelcome in Georgia society forever. As she sealed the letter, Eleanor heard carriage wheels on the drive. Moving to the window, she saw Sheriff Daniels alighting, accompanied by Augustus Reed and another man she didn't recognize. Their expressions were grim. Eleanor steeled herself. Whatever they had come for, evidence, accusations, arrest, she would face it with dignity. Her decision was made, her course set. They could threaten her, even imprison her, but they couldn't stop what she had set in motion. The Blackwood legacy of exploitation and suffering would end with her. And though Thomas's death would haunt her forever, Eleanor took comfort in knowing that his sacrifice would not be in vain. His would be the last life lost to the cursed inheritance of Willow Springs. As the men approached the house, thunder rumbled in the distance, a summer storm gathering once more over the Georgia countryside. Eleanor straightened her spine and moved to meet them, ready to face whatever justice or retribution awaited her. Behind her, her father's portrait seemed to watch with cold, judging eyes. But for the first time since his death, Eleanor felt free of his shadow. The curse of the Blackwood bloodline would end with her, not through supernatural means, but through the most human of actions. The recognition of a moral wrong and the courage to make it right, whatever the personal cost. The trial of Eleanor Blackwood began on the first Monday of September 1848 in the Savannah County Courthouse. The building, a stolid Greek Revival structure with imposing white columns, was filled beyond capacity. Locals crowded the benches, fanning themselves against the late summer heat, while reporters from newspapers as far away as Charleston and Richmond scribbled notes. The case had attracted widespread attention, a young plantation heiress accused of helping slaves escape, of betraying her class, her region, and her inheritance. Eleanor sat straight-backed beside her lawyer, Mr. Philip Hammond, a gray-haired man who had served as her father's attorney for decades. Hammond had tried to dissuade Eleanor from her plan to sell Willow Springs and free its enslaved workers, arguing that it would be financial suicide and social death. When she had refused to reconsider, he had reluctantly agreed to represent her at trial, though his demeanor suggested he found her actions incomprehensible. The charges against her were serious: aiding the escape of enslaved persons, conspiracy against the property interests of Savannah County, and negligent homicide in the death of Thomas. If convicted on all counts, she faced imprisonment and substantial fines, as well as the forfeiture of Willow Springs to the state. Judge Thornton, a heavy-set man with bushy side whiskers and cold eyes, called the court to order. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Winters, rose to make his opening statement. "Your Honor, gentlemen of the jury," he began, "the case before you today represents not merely a violation of state law, but an attack on our very way of life. Miss Eleanor Blackwood, upon inheriting one of the county's most prosperous plantations, deliberately set about undermining the institution that built her family's fortune." Eleanor kept her expression neutral as Winters detailed the disappearance of Isaac, followed by Jeremiah and Rebecca, and finally Daniel and Thomas. He emphasized Thomas's death, describing in vivid detail how the boy's body had been found face down in the mud of Widowmaker Marsh. "Evidence will show that Miss Blackwood orchestrated these escapes," Winters continued, "betraying not only her father's legacy, but the trust of every property owner in this county. Her reckless actions led directly to the death of a 17-year-old boy, a boy who would be alive today if not for her misguided idealism. When Hammond rose to present the defense, his manner was subdued. "Your Honor, gentlemen, Miss Blackwood acknowledges that several enslaved persons went missing from Willow Springs following her father's death. She deeply regrets the tragic death of young Thomas. However, she categorically denies any involvement in planning or facilitating these escapes." Eleanor had instructed Hammond not to mention her plans to sell the plantation and free its workers, plans that had been interrupted by her arrest. Such an admission would only strengthen the prosecution's case against her. The first witness called was Hargrove. Impeccably dressed and clearly enjoying his moment at the center of attention, he detailed the management of Willow Springs under Augustus Blackwood and the changes he had observed after Eleanor took control. Miss Blackwood immediately dismissed the overseer her father had employed for 15 years, Hargrove testified. "She instructed me not to pursue Isaac when he disappeared, claiming his age made him worthless to the plantation." "And what was your assessment of Isaac's value?" Winters asked. "As property, limited due to his age," Hargrove conceded. "But his escape set a dangerous example. When slaves believe they can run without consequences, discipline breaks down." "And after Isaac disappeared, what happened?" "Two more disappearances within weeks, Jeremiah and Rebecca, both valuable workers. Again, Miss Blackwood resisted efforts to track them down. She refused to allow questioning of the household staff, particularly Martha, who was close to all three who had escaped. And finally, Daniel and Thomas." Hargrove's expression hardened. "That night there was a fire in the stables, highly convenient, as it drew all attention away from the quarters. By the time we discovered Daniel and Thomas missing, they had a substantial head start." "Who discovered the fire, Mr. Hargrove?" "Miss Blackwood herself. She claimed to have gone to check on her horse because of the storm." Hammond objected to the implication, but Judge Thornton overruled him, allowing the testimony to stand. Sheriff Daniels testified next, describing the search for Daniel and Thomas and the discovery of the boy's body. "The marsh is treacherous in daylight," he explained. "At night in a storm it's deadly. No one familiar with the area would send men that way unless they had a guide who knew the path very well." "And did you find evidence of such a guide?" Winters asked. "We found footprints belonging to 3 individuals, matching Daniel, Thomas, and a third person wearing boots, a white man based on the boot size and stride length." "Cooper," Winters supplied. "The known abolitionist whose wagon was seen near Willow Springs the night Isaac disappeared." Augustus Reed followed, describing himself as an expert in retrieval of valuable property. He detailed his investigation into the escape network operating in the county, culminating in the capture of Samuel Cooper 2 days after Thomas's death. "Cooper confessed to helping slaves escape from several plantations," Reed testified. "He named Willow Springs specifically, though he refused to identify his local accomplice." "Where is Mr. Cooper now?" Hammond asked during cross-examination. Reed's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "He resisted arrest, violently. He didn't survive the encounter." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Cooper's death meant the prosecution had lost their star witness, the one person who could directly implicate Eleanor in the escapes. "Convenient," Hammond commented dryly. "Objection," Winters snapped. "Sustained," Judge Thornton said sharply. "Counsel will refrain from editorial comments." The morning's testimony painted a damning picture. During the midday recess, Hammond spoke quietly to Eleanor in a side room of the courthouse. "Miss Blackwood, the evidence against you is largely circumstantial, but compelling. Cooper's death creates reasonable doubt. Without him, they cannot prove you directly orchestrated these escapes." "What are you suggesting, Mr. Hammond?" Eleanor asked wearily. "If you were to express remorse for your lax oversight, attribute your actions to grief over your father's death, perhaps agree to sell Willow Springs to a suitable local buyer." He trailed off, studying her reaction. "You want me to perjure myself," Eleanor said flatly. I want you to avoid imprisonment, Hammond countered. Your position is precarious. The jury is composed entirely of men who own slaves themselves. They will not look kindly on a woman they believe has betrayed their common interests. Eleanor considered her options. She could lie, claim temporary insanity due to grief, sell Willow Springs to Caldwell or another local planter, and escape with her freedom and at least some of her fortune intact. The alternative was to stand her ground, likely be convicted, lose everything, and still fail in her goal of freeing those enslaved at Willow Springs. "What would happen to Martha if I'm convicted?" she asked suddenly. Hammond blinked, thrown by the question. "Martha, your house slave. I suppose she would be sold along with the rest of the property when Willow Springs is auctioned to cover the fines. And if I sell to Caldwell instead, she would become his property, unless you specifically excluded her from the sale." Eleanor nodded slowly, making her decision. "I will not perjure myself, Mr. Hammond, but I will agree to sell Willow Springs on my terms." When court reconvened, Winters called his final witness, Martha. The older woman entered the courtroom with dignity, her back straight, despite the hostile stares that followed her. As an enslaved person, Martha could not legally testify against a white person in Georgia courts. Instead, she would be questioned about the events at Willow Springs, with the jury instructed to consider her statements as contextual information rather than direct evidence. Martha described her duties at Willow Springs, her relationship with Isaac, and the changes at the plantation following Augustus Blackwood's death. "Miss Eleanor was kind," Martha said simply, kinder than her father had been. "Did Miss Blackwood ever discuss the institution of slavery with you?" Winters asked. "Objection," Hammond interjected, leading the witness. "I'll rephrase," Winters said smoothly. "What conversations did you have with Miss Blackwood about the management of Willow Springs?" Martha's dark eyes flicked to Eleanor briefly before answering. "Miss Eleanor asked about the conditions in the quarters, about whether people had enough food, warm clothing for winter. She wanted to know if any were sick or needed the doctor. Did she ever express dissatisfaction with her inheritance?" Martha hesitated. Miss Eleanor found her father's ledgers difficult. All those people listed with prices, like they weren't human. Winters pounced on this admission. So she objected to the very notion of human property. Did she ever speak of freeing slaves? "Objection!" Hammond rose again. "Counsel is leading the witness and attempting to put words in her mouth." "Sustained," Judge Thornton ruled. "Mr. Winters, confine your questions to factual matters within this witness's knowledge." Winters changed tack. "Martha, on the night Isaac disappeared, where were you?" "In my quarters behind the kitchen, where I sleep." "All night?" Martha's expression remained impassive. "Yes, sir. And on the night of the stable fire, when Daniel and Thomas disappeared?" "The same. I heard the shouting about the fire and came to help like everyone else." Winters approached the witness stand, his expression skeptical. "Martha, you've served the Blackwood family for how long?" "All my life, sir. I was born at Willow Springs." "And your loyalty is to the Blackwoods?" "My duty is," Martha corrected quietly. "Would you lie to protect Miss Blackwood?" Martha met his gaze steadily. "I have answered your questions truthfully, sir." When Hammond declined to cross-examine Martha, she was dismissed. As she passed Eleanor on her way out, their eyes met briefly. A lifetime of unspoken understanding passed between them in that moment, acknowledgement of a shared purpose, and of sacrifices made and yet to come. With the prosecution's case complete, Hammond called Eleanor to testify in her own defense. Taking the oath, Eleanor faced the courtroom with the composure that had been bred into her since childhood. Hammond led her through her background, her education at a prestigious ladies' seminary in Charleston, her return to Willow Springs upon her father's illness, and her inheritance of the plantation. "Miss Blackwood, did you help Isaac, Jeremiah, Rebecca, or Daniel escape from Willow Springs?" Hammond asked directly. "No, I did not," Eleanor replied, looking directly at the jury. It was not, strictly speaking, a lie. She had not helped them escape. She had arranged for Cooper to do so. The distinction felt hollow, but it allowed her to testify without perjury. "Did you instruct anyone else to help them escape?" "I did not." "Were you aware of any plans for these individuals to escape?" "I was not." Hammond continued, establishing that Eleanor had been raised to manage a large household but had limited experience with plantation operations prior to her father's death. "Would you describe the transition to full responsibility for Willow Springs as overwhelming?" "At times, yes," Eleanor acknowledged. "My father left detailed records, but there were many aspects of management he had never discussed with me. Is it possible that in the confusion following your father's death, security at Willow Springs became less stringent, creating opportunities for escape?" It's possible," Eleanor conceded. "I trusted Mr. Hargrove to manage those aspects of the plantation's operation." "And on the night of the stable fire, you discovered the blaze yourself?" "Yes. I couldn't sleep because of the storm and went to check on my horse." "Why did you go personally rather than sending a servant?" "Athena, my mare, is high-strung during storms. She knows me, trusts me. I wanted to calm her myself." During cross-examination, Winters attempted to shake Eleanor's composure. "Miss Blackwood, you testified that you did not help these slaves escape. Yet you also admitted that you ordered Mr. Hargrove not to pursue Isaac when he disappeared. Why?" "Isaac was elderly and frail," Eleanor replied evenly. "The cost and effort of pursuit seemed disproportionate to his value to the plantation. And when Jeremiah and Rebecca disappeared, Daniel and Thomas, did you consider them of similarly low value?" "Of course not. But by then it seemed clear that someone was helping slaves escape from multiple plantations in the county. Sheriff Daniels was already investigating." "Miss Blackwood, several witnesses have testified to your reluctance to implement standard security measures at Willow Springs. How do you explain this, if not as deliberate facilitation of these escapes?" Eleanor took a breath before answering. I still believe, that treating people with basic human dignity does not compromise security. My father ruled through fear. I chose a different approach. Even when that approach led to the death of a 17-year-old boy," Winters pressed. "I grieve for Thomas," Eleanor said quietly, her voice catching slightly. "His death was a tragedy that should never have happened." "A tragedy you caused, Miss Blackwood." "Objection," Hammond interjected. "Withdrawn," Winters said, satisfied that he had made his point. After Eleanor's testimony, Hammond called several character witnesses, neighbors who spoke of Eleanor's charitable work, her regular attendance at church before her father's death, her reputation for kindness and propriety. Their testimony felt hollow, even to Eleanor's ears, social niceties that carried little weight against the charges she faced. In his closing argument, Hammond emphasized the lack of direct evidence linking Eleanor to the escapes. "The prosecution has shown that slaves escaped from Willow Springs, as they have from other plantations in the county. They have shown that Miss Blackwood managed the plantation differently than her father had. But they have not proven beyond reasonable doubt that she actively facilitated these escapes, or that her actions led directly to Thomas's tragic death." Winters, in contrast, painted a damning portrait of Eleanor as a misguided idealist whose actions had undermined the social order and led to tragedy. Miss Blackwood may not have physically led these slaves to the marsh that night, but her negligence, her willful blindness, and her failure to maintain proper discipline created the conditions that made escape seem possible. Thomas's blood is on her hands as surely as if she had drowned him herself. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, an ominously brief period for such serious charges. When they returned, the foreman, a prosperous planter from the eastern part of the county, delivered their verdict. Guilty of criminal negligence in the death of Thomas, not guilty of directly aiding slave escapes due to insufficient evidence, but guilty of failing to maintain proper security measures as required of slave owners under Georgia law. Judge Thornton's sentence reflected the mixed verdict. Eleanor would not face imprisonment, but was fined $5,000, a substantial sum that would require the sale of Willow Springs to satisfy. Additionally, she was placed under the legal guardianship of her nearest male relative, a second cousin in Charleston, who would oversee the sale of the plantation and management of any remaining assets. The court recognizes that grief and the burden of unexpected responsibility may have clouded Miss Blackwood's judgment, Thornton intoned. Nevertheless, her failure to uphold her legal obligations as a property owner had tragic consequences. This sentence reflects the seriousness of that failure while acknowledging her youth and inexperience. After the verdict, Eleanor sat motionless as the courtroom emptied around her. Hammond approached, his expression a mixture of relief and resignation. "It could have been worse," he offered. "At least you're not going to prison. But Willow Springs will be sold at auction," Eleanor said flatly, "and everyone there will be sold with it." "Not necessarily," Hammond replied, lowering his voice. "Your cousin Richard has agreed to honor your wish to sell to a buyer of your choosing, provided the price is fair and the transaction legal." Eleanor looked up, hope flickering briefly. "Then the plan can still proceed?" "Modified, but yes. Your northern friend can still purchase Willow Springs, though the price must now include the $5,000 fine, and you'll have considerably less remaining for the manumissions you planned." "How much less?" Hammond hesitated. "Eleanor, you must understand. After the fine, the legal fees, and the costs associated with the transfer, you'll have almost nothing left. Certainly not enough to free 60 people. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this blow. "Then we free as many as we can," she said finally. "Starting with Martha and the house staff, then the oldest in the quarters, the children." "Oh, Eleanor," Hammond interrupted gently, "even that may not be possible. Your cousin must approve any expenditure. If he believes you're squandering your inheritance on manumissions, then we must convince him otherwise," Eleanor insisted, "or find another way." In the days following the trial, Eleanor remained under house arrest at Willow Springs, while arrangements for its sale proceeded. Richard Blackwood, her cousin and newly appointed guardian, arrived from Charleston to oversee the process. A thin, fastidious man in his 40s, Richard made no secret of his disapproval of Eleanor's actions. "You've disgraced the family name," he informed her upon arrival. "Aunt Margaret is beside herself. She had hopes of introducing you to Charleston society next season, but that's impossible now." "I'm sorry to have inconvenienced Aunt Margaret's social calendar," Eleanor replied dryly. Richard ignored her sarcasm. "I've received offers from several local planters. Caldwell's is the most generous, 15% above market value. I intend to accept it by the end of the week." "I have a buyer," Eleanor countered. "A northern investor willing to pay full market price." Richard's eyebrows rose. "A northerner, buying a Georgia plantation, whatever for? He believes paid labor can be as profitable as slave labor. He wants to prove it." Richard scoffed. "Ridiculous. No one would work these fields voluntarily, not in this heat, not for any wage a farm could profitably pay. Nevertheless, that is his intention. And as my guardian, your duty is to secure a fair price for the property, not to judge the buyer's business model." After further argument, Richard reluctantly agreed to meet with Eleanor's proposed buyer. 2 days later, James Whitfield arrived from Boston. A tall, austere man, with the unmistakable bearing of a Quaker, Whitfield presented himself as a businessman interested in agricultural reform. In truth, he was a committed abolitionist who had worked with Cooper and others to establish a network of safe houses for escaped slaves. Eleanor had never met him before, but Cooper had assured her of his integrity and his willingness to help. To Eleanor's relief, Whitfield handled Richard skillfully, presenting sound business arguments for his interest in Willow Springs and offering a fair price. He made no mention of manumission, focusing instead on his plans to introduce new farming techniques and implement a wage labor system. "And what becomes of the current workforce?" Richard asked delicately. I would retain those willing to work under the new system, Whitfield replied smoothly. Those who prefer to seek employment elsewhere would be free to do so, of course. Richard frowned at this, but the price Whitfield offered was indeed fair, and he had no legal grounds to refuse the sale based solely on the buyer's northern origin or unorthodox business plans. With the sale agreement signed, Eleanor had one final task before leaving Willow Springs forever. On her last night in the house where she had been born, she asked Martha to join her in the study. "The sale is complete," Eleanor told her as Martha closed the door behind her. "Mr. Whitfield will take possession next week." Martha nodded, her expression guarded. "And what becomes of us?" "Mr. Whitfield is an abolitionist," Eleanor said quietly. "He will free everyone at Willow Springs." Martha's eyes widened. "All of us?" "Yes. Those who wish to stay and work for wages may do so. Those who wish to leave will receive enough money for passage north." Martha sank slowly into a chair, her composure cracking for the first time in Eleanor's memory. "Miss Eleanor, how? After the fine, the legal fees?" "I sold everything," Eleanor explained simply. "My mother's jewelry, my father's horses, every personal possession of value. Mr. Whitfield added what he could. It won't be much for each person, but it will be enough for a start. And you? What will you have left?" Eleanor managed a small smile. "My conscience, Martha, and the knowledge that no one will suffer in bondage at Willow Springs again." "Where will you go?" Martha asked, concern evident in her voice. "To Boston, as planned. My mother's sister has agreed to take me in. I'll likely become that most pitied of creatures, a spinster dependent on relatives' charity, but I'll sleep at night." Martha studied her for a long moment. "You know they'll never forgive you, not just for freeing slaves, but for proving it could be done, for showing another way was possible." "I know," Eleanor acknowledged. "The Blackwood name will be cursed in Georgia for generations to come." "So be it." The following morning, Eleanor boarded a northbound stagecoach in the pre-dawn light, carrying a single trunk containing her remaining possessions. As Willow Springs receded into the distance, she felt a curious lightness despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. She had lost her inheritance, her social standing, her place in the world she had known, but she had gained something more valuable. The knowledge that 63 people who had awakened in bondage that morning would soon go to sleep as free men, women, and children. If that was a curse on the Blackwood bloodline, then it was one Eleanor would bear gladly. In the years that followed, Willow Springs became something of a local legend and a cautionary tale. James Whitfield's experiment with paid labor was short-lived. Within 2 years, facing hostility from neighboring planters and difficulty finding workers willing to risk association with the notorious plantation, he sold the property at a loss to a consortium of local businessmen who promptly reinstated slave labor. But by then, most of the former slaves of Willow Springs were gone, having used their freedom and the small sums provided to make their way north. Some settled in Philadelphia, others continued to Canada, beyond the reach of the fugitive slave law. A few remained in Georgia, working as free laborers on small farms or in Savannah's bustling port. Martha was among those who went north, eventually settling in Boston, not far from where Eleanor Blackwood lived quietly with her aunt's family. Though they rarely spoke of Willow Springs, the bond forged there remained unbroken. When Martha died in 1876, long after the Civil War had ended slavery throughout the United States, Eleanor was at her bedside. Eleanor herself never married, devoting her life instead to abolitionist causes and, after the war, to educational initiatives for former slaves. She died in 1889, leaving behind a modest estate and a journal detailing her experiences at Willow Springs. The journal, published posthumously, became an important first-hand account of one woman's stand against the institution of slavery. As for Willow Springs itself, the plantation changed hands several times over the decades, gradually declining in prominence. During Sherman's march to the sea in 1864, Union troops burned the main house to the ground, leaving only the stone foundation and chimney standing, a ghostly reminder of its past. Local legend holds that the ruins of Willow Springs are haunted. Some claim to have seen the figure of a young black man dripping water, walking the path that leads to Widowmaker Marsh. Others report the apparition of a young woman in white, standing among the ruined columns of what was once the front portico, looking northward as if waiting for someone's return. But the true legacy of Willow Springs isn't found in ghost stories or crumbling ruins. It lives in the descendants of those who found freedom because one woman rejected her inheritance of human suffering and chose a different path, cursing her bloodline in the eyes of her contemporaries, but redeeming it in the judgment of history.